Nestled in the hills outside Louisville, Kentucky, sits a 180,000 square foot behemoth. Waverly Hills Sanatorium has become one of the giants of American ghost lore. Referred to as one of the most haunted locations in the U.S., the tales of this place include shadow figures, voices in the dark, footsteps echoing through empty halls, stories repeated so many times that they've probably become more famous than the building itself. But legends are easy, and evidence is harder.
We are No Lights Paranormal. Tonight, we're not here to worship the reputation of a scary story. We're here to challenge haunted expectations, separate legend from reality, and ask one simple question. What does Waverly Hills actually give investigators to work with? Hello, and welcome to No Lights Paranormal, where we take haunted locations, strange claims, and spooky stories, then look at them through the eyes of actual investigators. I'm Teresa, historian, researcher, and the one responsible for separating documented history from decades of ghost stories.
And I'm Alex, the Baba Yaga enthusiast, the equipment setter-upper, and the poor bastard usually responsible for making sure all the blinking boxings are actually recording something.
This season, we're changing the format a little. Instead of jumping between several different stories every episode, we're slowing things down and dedicating each episode to a single location.
So this time, we're going to look at history, the claims, what we think deserves attention, what probably belongs in the questionable at best pile, how we would investigate the location now, and if we've actually been there, what happened when No Lights Paranormal actually walks through the door.
This season, we really want to focus on not only the obvious haunted places, but places that are accessible for people to actually book and visit for themselves.
Which actually makes sense because, as followers of some of our friends in the paranormal field, one big issue that I've begun noticing on a lot of the groups that at one point were smaller and have grown is that they're doing the same old big haunted locations. The mountaintops, the Trans-Alleghenies, the Waverly Hills, the Stanleys. And honestly, one of the things that I used to really appreciate is that they introduced me to a lot of new places that I wasn't previously aware of. And that's really what I'd like to get back to the community.
So tonight, we're starting with one of the biggest names in the paranormal world.
Waverly Hills Sanatorium.
Because we talk about ghosts. If before we talk about ghosts, we need to talk about Waverly Hills and how it existed in the first place. Because if you don't understand history, you really can't understand how this location became what it is today. When most people hear Waverly Hills, they immediately think haunted hospital. But that was never the purpose of this building. It was built to save lives. At the beginning of the 20th century, tuberculosis was one of the most feared diseases in the world. People called it the White Plague. And before antibiotics, doctor had very few ways to fight it. There was no quick cure. There was no simple prescription. The treatment philosophy at the time was isolation, rest, fresh air, sunlight, good nutrition, and long-term care. That is why sanatoriums exist. They're not just hospitals. These are places where patients could be removed from crowded cities, separated from the general population, and placed in an environment doctors hoped would give them the best chances to survive.
And that's one of those things that I think gets lost on people when we talk about Waverly now, because today it's massive paranormal network. Like I said, top 10 most haunted places in the U.S., right? But to be fair, all of those places in the U.S. are probably, in some circles, known as the top 10. People think of dark hallways, ghost stories, the TV shows, Room 502, the Body Chute. But originally, it wasn't a haunted attraction. It was a medical facility full of people trying very hard not to die.
Exactly. In the early 1900s, Jefferson County, Kentucky had a serious tuberculosis problem. Louisville had wetlands along the Ohio River, and tuberculosis was spreading through the area like wildfire. Officials needed a dedicated facility where they could care for patients with what they actually called pulmonary tuberculosis. The first Waverly Hills Sanatorium opened in 1910. It was a much smaller building than the one that people recognize today. It was only 2 stories, a wooden hospital, had open air pavilions, and originally they were able to care for around 40 or 50 patients.
which is totally tiny compared to what Waverly eventually became and what we know of the building today. And unfortunately, as we very well know, the disease did not stay tiny.
No, it did not. The need for tuberculosis care, I can talk, it just kept growing. Patients were being moved to temporary quarters, additional spaces were added, the children's pavilion was built. The facility kept expanding beyond the original hospital, and it just couldn't keep up. Eventually, the wooden structures were no longer enough. They needed something larger, more durable, better suited for the number of patients who needed care. Construction began in 1924 on what we now know today as the gigantic 5-story brick building. It officially opened in 1926 and was meant to hold more than 400 patients. At the time, it was actually considered one of the most advanced tuberculosis hospitals in the country.
And when you say hospital, I believe that people should picture more than just patient rooms. It was kind of its own little world. People lived there, worked there, ate there, recovered there. Think one of these more open and advanced campuses that we have now that have the playgrounds and the different rooms and things like that. It was not a quick visit. Some patients were there for months, some were there for years, and some really never made it out.
hmm Doctors and nurses worked ridiculously long hours, just like they do now, but patients were being treated with the absolute best methods available at the time. Some of them seemed harsh and strange and even barbaric by modern standards, but fresh air porches were a major part of tuberculosis care. Patients got exposure to sunlight and outdoor air because the doctors believed that that type of environment could help their bodies fight the disease. Some of the treatments were uncomfortable, some were evasive, some were downright awful, but they were based on medical ideas that we just simply do not use today. But that doesn't mean that the people were not trying. They were working with the knowledge that they had. Families were hoping for a cure, and patients were fighting to survive. Some people did survive, some recovered, and actually went home.
And I think that actually really does matter because once a building becomes famous for being haunted, such as Waverly Hills did, people tend to reduce the history down to one question. Well, how many people died there? And when you're going to investigate, somehow apparently that matters. And yes, people died at Waverly. A lot of people were brought there because they were very sick and not everyone recovered. That's part of the history, and it shouldn't be ignored or softened, but it also should not be turned into paranormal like math. Like death automatically means more ghosts.
Mm, that's so true. And that turns it into like a suffering scoreboard, which is kind of messed up. If you want to get super technical, there's a lot of rumors out there that, the myth say that more than 50,000 people died at Waverly. Now, the actual evidence suggests that that number was closer to maybe 6 to 8,000. So, huge discrepancies between fact and fiction there. The highest number of deaths in any single year was actually 152, which is bad, just bad. Basically every other day someone was not okay.
Bad, but considering the amount of people there, kind of amazing in itself.
That's true. That is true. But Waverly's not just a place where people died. It's a place where people were trying to live. They had children there, they had adults there, they had people who recovered and got to return home to their families. And then there were people who never had that chance. For many families, sending someone to Waverly meant hope, but it also meant distance and fear and uncertainty. You were taking someone you love to a place designed to isolate them from the entire rest of the world.
Which kind of gives the building a lot of emotional weight before you ever get into a ghost story. That does not mean that sad history equals haunted, but it does explain why people walk into Waverly and feel the heaviness of it. This is not fake tragedy painted onto a building for tourism. Real people suffered there, real people fought to live there, and real people lost people there.
Hmm. But then medicine changed. In the 1940s, they invented streptomycin, and it became one of the first effective antibiotic treatments for tuberculosis. And honestly, it changed everything. Tuberculosis had once required long term isolation and sanatorium care, but gradually it became more treatable. As medicine improved, the need for these large hospitals declined. Waverly Hills officially closed as a tuberculosis sanatorium in 1961.
But let's be clear, that was not the end of the building.
No. After its time as a tuberculosis hospital, Waverly later reopened as Woodhaven Medical Services. It was a geriatric care facility. That part of the building's history is also important because the site did not stop being associated with illness and care and vulnerability and institutional life as a whole after the sanatorium closed. Woodhaven eventually would go on to close as well, and after that, the building actually entered a really long period that shaped much of its modern reputation. Abandonment, decay, vandalism, weather. There's always people sneaking in, stories spreading around.
And that's where Waverly Hills starts turning from a historical medical site into a legend, right? Because abandoned buildings invite stories. They always do. We have plenty of those around here where we're located, especially buildings that have already suffered, that already have suffering in their bones.
Exactly. The documented history tells us what Waverly was built for, who it served, why it mattered. But once the building was abandoned, the history began picking up layers of folklore. Some stories do have roots in real events, but some are pretty exaggerated. Some may have been repeated so many times that people stopped asking where they came from.
And that's where No Lights Paranormal has to be careful because history and legend are not enemies, but they aren't exactly the same things.
Hmm. And with Waverly Hills, both are part of the story. The history explains why the building matters. The claims explain why paranormal investigators keep on coming back.
So now is when we get to the fun part, the part that most people know Waverly Hills for, the ghost stories. And there are a lot of them. Honestly, probably way too many of them.
That's the challenging part with most famous locations. The more famous a place becomes, the harder it is to separate the original reports from the stories that have simply been repeated over and over and over. If you ask people, what's Waverly known for? Usually you're going to hear the same handful of claims. You're going to talk about shadow figures, disembodied voices, footsteps in empty hallways, room 502, the body chute, the children spirits like Timmy, the man in white, but all those claims are not equal. Some are tied to specific areas of the hospital, some are tied to repeated witness reports, some are part of the building's official paranormal reputation. But some of them are harder to verify, and some may be more atmosphere than actual evidence.
And that definitely matters because reputation can make everything feel bigger. A knock at Waverly Hills feels a lot different than a knock in your garage. But the sound itself still has a place to earn.
One of the most famous claims at Waverly is shadow figures. Visitors and investigators alike have reported seeing dark, human shaped forms moving through the building. Some of them darting across hallways, some of them say they appear in doorways, some say they just vanished around a corner. The official paranormal reputation of Waverly includes stories of shadow people, and that's become one of the building's signature claims.
I would say, from a personal standpoint, that shadow figures are a little bit tricky because they usually happen fast. You see something, you turn your head, and it's gone. Shadow figures tend to always be like right out of the corner of your eye. Could it be paranormal? Maybe. Could it also be lighting, fatigue, expectation, your eyes adjusting in a dark hallway, or your brain trying to make sense of shapes in a huge old building? Also, maybe. That does not mean you ignore the report. That does mean, however, that you treat it kind of carefully. A shadow figure claim gets a lot stronger if a static camera catches movement in the same area, or if multiple people see something from different angles, or if it happens in a controlled space where people are accounted for.
So true. Another common category is the voices. People have reported whispers, full on conversations, names being called, and possible responses during EVP sessions. Some reports are very simple. Someone hears a voice in a hallway where no one should be there. Others are more specific. Voices answering specific questions, voices telling people to leave, or children's voices in areas that are associated with the younger patients.
And I also feel like audio is one of those places where investigators can get themselves into trouble pretty quickly. Because old buildings are liars. They echo, they carry sound in very weird and strange ways. Like you're talking about long concrete hallways that echo substantially. Someone can whisper from another floor depending on what building you're at, and still it'll end up on a recorder where they do not seem like they should be. So if you capture a building, a voice at Waverly, the first question shouldn't be whether or not it's a ghost. The first question literally should be, where was everybody at?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Footsteps. Footsteps are another major claim. People reported hearing walking above them, behind them, beside them, or down hallways right near you, only to discover that there's not actually anyone there. At Waverly, that claim makes sense as something investigators would pay attention to because the building is massive. Long halls, multiple floors, stairwells, concrete, open spaces, and all of that stuff makes sound travel in pretty strange ways.
Exactly. Footsteps are interesting, but they are not automatically paranormal. Again, I'm going to go back to the concrete echoing down long hallways,
Hmm.
especially in a place that big. If a team is scattered all over the building, footsteps become almost useless unless you have good notes and body cams. Body cams, static cams, that all make a big difference in trying to pick up where your team was and what you heard in what location. But if you have a controlled quiet period where everyone is accounted for and a recorder or a camera picks up walking an empty area, well, now we have something worth looking at.
Facts. Then there's room 502. 502 is probably one of the most infamous rooms in Waverly Hills. The most common legend says that a nurse died there. Oftentimes, she's described as having opted out. Some versions say that she was pregnant and unmarried. Some versions connect the story to a hanging. Other versions add a nurse who is said to have jumped from the room, like completely out of the building. The details vary, just kind of depends on who's telling the story. That's important because room 502 is famous, but famous does not automatically mean historically accurate.
And that is definitely like one of those stories where I start to get suspicious. Not because I think that experiences in 502 are fake, but because the story has multiple versions and every version gets more dramatic, you kind of just have to slow down. That's when your investigative brain has to kick in. What can we verify? What's folklore? What is a tour story tradition? What's a witness experience? Those aren't all the same bucket.
Mm. Paranormal claims around room 502 include shadows, voices, super uneasy feelings, reports of people hearing phrases like get out or just simply not feeling welcome in that area. Because the room already has such a heavy legend attached to it, people often enter it expecting that something's going to happen.
Which means that room 502 is probably definitely worth investigating, but not worshiping, in the fact that you should be a little bit more careful with what you pull out of a room like that. I would absolutely put equipment there, but I would also be careful not to let it eat the whole night. A famous room can become a trap, Everybody wants the famous room to perform, much like everybody wants the famous building to perform. So they start giving weak things more weight than they actually deserve.
And one of the most important things that I can say is that that building does not owe a performance to anyone. So we can't go in just automatically expecting it to perform.
And honestly, no building does. That building does not care how far you drove, how much money you spent to go there,
Mhm.
nothing.
That's
That
so true.
building is a piece of history, and whether it's haunted or not, it doesn't owe you anything.
Mhm. So, last but certainly not least, the Body Chute. This is also known as the death tunnel. Historically, the tunnel actually had really practical purposes. It connected the main building to the lower part of the hill where the train went through, and that was used for moving like supplies and materials and, bringing up food and all kinds of stuff. But legend also has it that it was also used to move bodies out of the building, and they did this in the tunnel to stay out of the view of living patients because they didn't want the morale inside the sanatorium to completely collapse because of the number of people who passed away. So, whether people know it as the Body Chute or the Death Tunnel, it's become one of Waverly's most recognizable features.
I would definitely put the Body Chute in as one of those places where history and legend are tangled together, right?
Mhm.
And honestly, that makes it interesting, not because tunnels are automatically haunted in the same way that, if you go to a regular house, basements aren't automatically haunted. But because the story is that bodies were moved through there, people report activity there, then it becomes a location with a specific claim attached to a specific space. And that is much easier to investigate than a vague, the building feels creepy.
Right. Waverly also has a lot of claims involving children. The official stories include ghostly children, and the best known figure is Timmy. He's often described as a boy who roams the halls and he likes to play with a ball. So people will bring in a ball or a toy into the building hoping for interaction with him. Some claim that the ball moves or is played with.
And that's one of those claims where, while I would follow up on it, I immediately want controls. Because if you're going to use a ball as a trigger object, you need to know the floor, the angle, the air movement, whether anyone touched it, whether anyone was walking nearby, and whether a camera had it in frame the whole time. The balls that I'm most often seeing left there are those old air-filled rubber balls that, while yes, they do make it easier for said ghost child to move them, they also make it easier for a barely perceptible draft to move them as well.
Hmm. Speaking of drafts, there's also reports of slamming doors. Some visitors and volunteers have described doors closing or slamming when no one is nearby. And that kind of claim can be interesting because, in theory, it is actually testable. You can watch a door with a static camera, you can note the air movement, you can control who is in the area, you can check whether or not the door actually swings naturally or if it catches.
And door claims are great. Again, like you said, when they're controlled. They're kind of garbage when everybody is wandering around. If six people are moving through the building and someone says, I heard a door, it doesn't mean much. But if a camera was watching a closed hallway, there's no one there, and the door moves, well, now we're talking.
Another commonly mentioned figure is the man in white. Some reports describe a white clad figure moving through the corridors. Depending on the version of the story, people interpret him as a doctor or possibly a patient or some kind of an apparition that is connected to the hospital's medical history.
And that is one that is interesting visually, but again, it's kind of hard to decipher from an actual evidence standpoint. Because a figure seen for a second in dark hallway is very difficult to verify. But if the same type of figure is reported in the same area repeatedly, that gives you a reason to place cameras there. Not because you believe it automatically, but because you're now officially testing a pattern.
So when we talk about the claims at Waverly, we're not just saying that they're all equally strong. We're saying that these are the building's paranormal map. Shadow figures, voices, footsteps, room 502, the body chute, children, Timmy, slamming doors, the man in white. It's a lot. And each claim gives investigators a possible direction to go, but each one also comes with its own problems.
And that is where the No Lights Paranormal investigator side of it gets to kick in. A claim gets a lot more interesting when it's tied to a place, when it repeats, or when you can set equipment on it and let the room exist without us constantly poking it, I'm sorry, because investigators fall into this trap all the time. We feel like our hands have to be doing something. We need to actively be doing an EVP session. We can't just set things down and let it run. And then we have to ask another question: walk into a room, hold another device, chase another noise, be the paranormal YouTube star.
But sometimes the better investigation is where you just stop interfering.
Exactly. And I think one of the things that we've learned over the years is that static matters, repeatable matters. People keep reporting footsteps in the same hallway. Put a camera there. If voices are recorded in the same room, leave a recorder there and stop talking over it. One of the biggest things that I get tired of seeing is how many times have you walked into a place and you sat down to do an EVP session, and how many times have you repeated those same 5 to 10 questions?
Mhm.
What is your name? How long have you been here? Do you
Right.
like it here? It's always the same
They're
question.
probably very tired of our questions at this point.
So, like I said, static matters, repeatable matters. If a door allegedly moves, watch the door. That's the difference between chasing a haunted story and testing a claim.
And with a building like Waverly, that matters even more because there are just too many stories to chase all of them.
Exactly. So, if we had one night inside Waverly Hills, we would have to choose what actually deserves attention and what doesn't.
So, if we were walking back into Waverly right now, after everything we learned, where would you even start?
Well, me being a tech guy, and us having been there twice, to be fair, I know now kind of how I would set it up. Before I get into what my battle plan would be, I actually want to ask you first, not being, and don't get me wrong, in no way, shape, or form is my wife unfamiliar with the equipment, but not being the person that's used to going in and setting up, knowing the history, knowing the claims, and knowing how much legend is wrapped around this place, how would you want to approach it?
Well, I mean, honestly, I think that some of the biggest things are to not allow the legends to decide what the investigation is going to be. There are important historical areas that are, they're probably just as important as the famous claims that go through there. You got to separate the building's documented history from the stories that are online that are just repeated over and over and over. Room 502 definitely matters, but it shouldn't consume the entire night because there are equally important places in the building. The body chute, pretty darn important because we do know that it was a main thoroughfare for every single thing that they needed to get up into the hospital and unfortunately a way for some people to leave. However, logistically, if you've ever been in that tunnel, which I know you have,
Multiple times and
it's
plenty of times by myself.
it's a logistical nightmare. The hill portion is ridiculously steep. So there's definitely some safety stuff going on there as well. So,
I would definitely say that from a logistic standpoint, it's relatively easy to set up a camera at the top.
right.
But also to anybody that's ever been in a concrete building with a cell phone, like,
Mhm.
A, there's no electricity at the bottom of that tunnel.
Right.
So running a wire all the way down that tunnel, and let me tell you, that tunnel is probably a good quarter of a mile long. Like it's
I
it's not a short tunnel.
it's not short.
So not only that, but getting signal back up to, I want to be clear, when people use terms like wireless DVR, it's only half correct. All right.
Right.
A, you have to plug in your cameras at the bottom. But B, even your wireless DVR has to be close enough to send signal back to the DVR box itself.
Right.
So when you're talking a quarter mile away at the bottom of a concrete tunnel, like you're not guaranteed to get reception back to where it was.
Yeah.
And if you do, it might lag and jolt, and like you're not going to see any movement in real time.
To be specific, the Body Chute, I believe, is actually just a little bit over 500 feet long.
All I know is it feels like forever when
It
you're walking down it by
feels
yourself in
like
the
it's
dark.
5,000 feet long. I definitely think that it's really important, though, to prioritize like patient areas, like hallways and transition spaces. These are going to be just as important as the famous rooms, like the nurses' stations, for example. I mean, that was like the main hub for your nurses. They'd sit and do their paperwork. They would listen for the bells to go off to go treat their patients. Like this is the place where they would rest, where they would unwind, but also where, they would talk about some of the horrible things going on. And it's transition space that I was talking about. So much just movement and happening there around the nurses station. But that for me is one of the big things. So you could go through the investigation and basically make like a checklist of all of the ghost tour highlights, or you could investigate the building as a whole. I think that's the way it should happen.
So I kind of want to, so I'm going to touch on something before I break into how I would kind of set this up. In this portion of the podcast now, we're trying to go about how we would investigate the building, correct? But before I do that, I want to touch on something because I feel like to a very rich extent, it really depends on the gear and the amount of gear that you have. All right. So we've talked about places like the Body Chute, and we've talked about places like Room 502. If you're like us, and this is where I can come back to our standpoint and how we would investigate the building, I have 8 wireless DVR cameras. I would probably take, and I would say that most every place, and not only just Waverly Hills, but most every place has somewhere between 3 and 5, like, oh my God, locations in it. So with Waverly Hills, I would say one of those locations would be the Body Chute. One of those locations would be 502. One of those locations would be like that turret room. You know the one that I'm talking about. It was kind of the morning, like, breakfast room where everybody got together,
That's actually right by the second floor nurses station.
and there's the nurses' station on the far side. Now, if I were one of those people that I did not have extra DVR cameras, in honesty, in the way that we do now, I would probably I would try to pick a focal point room, and maybe every couple of hours I would rotate where the camera is on the focal point, because what matters most to me now is the static cameras. So anything that I didn't have that was not pointing at like a focal area where it's we report this and this and this, where I'm really trying to test claims versus what's actually going on. So anything that I didn't have that wasn't pointing at a focal area, and don't get me wrong, I have enough cameras. I'd leave one in 502 all night.
Oh
That's
yeah,
fine. I'd
absolutely.
leave one in the Body Chute all night.
Mhm.
I'd leave one in that turret room all night. I would leave one in that nurse's station all night. But that's because I have 4 extra DVR cameras that I would have pointed down hallways. The longest and cleanest hallway that you can get that's going to pick up the most traffic as far as where your people are at is actually probably, in my opinion, the best places to set those cameras.
Mm.
Because when you're running things like you talked about before with the static audio recorders versus the, oh my God, we have to be having an interactive EVP session.
Right.
We just did our investigation and we left audio recorders in rooms that claimed activity, and the only thing that we walked around with was body cams on our cell phones that had audio on them. And we got some telling stuff from audio recorders that were just sitting there.
Now, one thing I want to point out with that is that you had discussed, the idea of asking the same exact mundane questions over and over and over. We really strayed away from doing that.
We did.
A lot of the questions that were asked, like we went back, so specifically the investigation that we were just on, which we're going to tell you guys about next week.
Well, the week after next,
The
because
week
we're
after,
doing every
sorry.
2 weeks now.
So yes, anyway, we were focusing a whole lot on the history of the building, which I think is the most important part. So there was a lot of, hey, the 4th of July is getting ready to come up. I know a lot of the people that, lived here were military vets and, talking about the country and talking about just different things. And it just so happens too that Trent, one of our team members, he's actually a Marine. So, he started doing some cadence and just trying to interact in a way that meant something to the people who lived there, rather than just, "What's your name? What year did you die?"
No, and that's an honest, I think, maybe realization that some groups come to after we've been doing this for 25 years. All
Mhm.
right.
It's been a
So
minute.
I think after time, maybe you come to that realization, but hopefully before that, you come to that
Yeah.
because, it's funny that a lot of groups and a lot of message boards and Facebook groups and this is and that's are like, oh, well, treat ghosts like people. But they literally walk into any building and they ask those same 5 questions.
Yeah, like,
And I'm
what?
like, "You're not talking to them like they're people.
You're talking like they're objects or something, like they're.
And the reality is the 10 groups that were in that building for the last 10 days before you asked those same questions.
Yeah.
If I was a ghost, I'm not answering that shit anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not we can't go into a building expecting them to be like trained circus monkeys. It doesn't work that way.
So, I mean, the point for me is that you just kinda have to give them something different. And I don't know about you, but, like, this last time that we went to this last location that we went to, and this is what I would carry into any location going forward, is a lot more static and a lot less, "Oh my god, I have to be chasing something all the time."
Yeah, that's really important, especially when you start talking about, like, with your static audio and your static video. If somebody hears something and you can take off across the building trying to, like, chase a noise or whatever, all you're really doing is creating chaos.
You're haunting your own audio is what you're
Exactly,
doing.
exactly, because now you have no idea, was that floorboard squeak, so and so jetting across the building? You just gotta be calm.
So, without getting too much into the weeds and too ahead of ourselves as far as the investigation that we'll talk about during the next episode, I just want to kind of lay out for the listeners kind of how we had it set up. It wasn't a Waverly Hills size building. It also wasn't a tiny building, but it's one of those buildings that had 2 wings where we could have our team right now is comprised of 6 full-time people. We broke that down into 3 groups of 2. We had 1 group running the right wing, 1 group running the left wing, and as opposed to just sitting there bored, we had the other group split in half and they were actually isolated and sitting by themselves watching the DVR cameras on each wing,
Mhm.
which I feel like kind of made a difference in a way.
It did. I really enjoyed having that sort of command center feeling. Even though we split it into 2 parts. It was nice because it was also nice to just have an investigator who was able to sit by themselves where, there's not any noise going on around you and you can just let the building do what it's gonna do.
Absolutely. And like I said, the nice part was like realistically, it wasn't necessary for anybody to sit at the DVRs.
No,
Uh,
not for, like, viewing purposes.
but also it gave us a chance to kind of see where people were at and it also gave two people at any given time the ability to be kind of isolated by themselves and see if anything happened.
Let alone the fact that if you are actually going to sit there and look at these cameras, if you see something or you hear something and John and Brad are over on that side of the building, walkie them and be like, dude, something's going down on the floor above you.
So yeah, I definitely agree with you, and I definitely think that having somebody there with the ability to call things out on the radio, should we see anything, definitely it helps. It's definitely one of those things where we have no direction prior to that. So I mean, that's one of those things that I would like to carry going forward.
Right, right. So we've talked about the history, we've talked about the claims, and we've talked about how we like to sort of approach the investigation. Now, we've actually been there twice. So I think it's also important to talk about that, like our actual experience. When we were going in to the investigation with all the stories and all the history and all that stuff, what did you actually expect going in?
Okay. So let me define this a little bit more strategically. Going in the first time, I expected the fucking world, right? Waverly Hills is one of the 5 top most haunted places in the world.
Right.
Yada yada yada.
Right.
Yeah. So expectations through the roof going in.
Agreed.
How about you?
Yeah, 100% agreed. I definitely expected, to be interacting with balls rolling down the hallway and see shadow figures darting across my vision and hear my name being called from distant hallways, all kinds of crazy stuff.
Now,
Yeah,
I think I know the answer to this, but did the building feel different in person than what you expected?
100%. I I think that was gonna have to go back to the first time that we were there. I think that I expected a very heavy, sort of oppressive, sort of scary situation, and honestly, that's just not what we got. It's just not. Matter of fact, it's like the furthest thing from the truth. I felt home. I felt comfortable. I felt stable.
What I would say in response to that is I definitely agree with you at least the first time that we went there.
Yeah.
I would say that probably the second time we were there, it did not feel different than it did a little bit in the ways that it didn't feel quite as
Welcoming home.
quite as warm as it did the first time, especially at the end of the first time.
Agreed.
But I think that actually all goes back to the fact that so many people are so into the, "Oh, well, how many people died there, the oppressiveness, yada, yada, yada,"
Mhm.
that they forget that this was home for a lot of people.
Exactly. That's exactly
And
right.
some people went home, and some people actually got better. So there was the feeling of home too.
Yep. So for us, again, going off of our first visit, did Waverly live up to its reputation?
Um, when we got there, while we were investigating and until later, I would say no. But in hindsight, I would say that's on me and not the building.
I agree with that. I think we didn't know what we were getting into. Hindsight.
I mean, let's be realistic. Everybody wants the scary thing.
Mhm.
Everybody wants the, oh my God, these shadow figures are chasing you down halls.
I do have to say though that with the way that our very first visit ended, sitting there in the nurse's station at sort of the crux of the corner of the building, watching the sunrise over the property, we were smelling what smelled like muffins baking in the kitchen. It was the most surreal experience I have ever had. Hands down, and nothing has topped it since. Um,
Well, that actually leads me into my next question. Do you believe that it was disappointing because it was quiet, or do you think the quiet taught us something?
I most definitely think that the quiet taught us something. I think it taught us a lot. It did me, anyways. It taught me to look at the story of what the building really was, as opposed to looking at the hype and the folklore. Because once I sunk myself into actually being at Waverly Hills Sanatorium instead of being at a haunted location, I feel like the building really opened up and let us in, and we had just a really, really beautiful moment.
I definitely agree with that. And I would say that despite the fact that it was to a lesser extent, that even kind of extended into our second trip there.
Agreed.
Again, it's really hard for logic brained first time people to walk into most haunted building in America and be like, oh, well, sometimes they're chill ghosts and they're not ghosts that are trying to chase you out or beat you.
Exactly. Exactly. So, do you think that the cost, like the literal financial cost and the fame that has been created surrounding all the stories and stuff, created like unfair expectations of what the building would be?
120%.
Yeah.
And I honestly think that we've talked extensively on the fact that Trans Allegheny is like my Mount Everest, right?
Right.
And to be honest with you, like when we started talking about it this year and how like that was the planned trip, but sadly Trans Allegheny does not like to respond to us for some reason, nor maybe they're just booked solid, and that's the reality of
Yeah.
the matter.
Not sure.
But there was a part of me that was actually, and if you listen to my whole explanation here, it does tie back to Waverly Hills, but there was a part of me that was actually relieved that now it's being put off until at least next year
Right.
because the myth still gets to be the myth.
I get that.
Because, I mean, $1,500, $1,800 after the insurance, a 6-hour trip. Like, I am going in. I want a fucking brick thrown at me. I want to get scratched. I want to get thrown down a goddamn hallway.
I mean, but
And
that's
like,
not
but
reality.
the reality of paranormal investigations is like that building doesn't owe you shit
Exactly. You could sit there all night and not
and
hear
not get
cricket.
nothing. And do you know how fucking bummed out I would be if my Mount Everest gave me nothing? You know what? Pause. It's like this last fall when we went to Penhurst with the Lore Lodge.
That was a phenomenal trip. I had
It was a phenomenal trip. There was part of me that was stressed out in the beginning because there were a lot of personalities and no real plan, and it kind of clashed for a minute, and I had to reset my brain.
agreed. Agreed.
And you know what? What I want out of Trans Allegheny is the same thing that we got out of just give me one good EVP.
Agreed.
Just give me one good EVP.
And we did. We did get our one good EVP, and I am never gonna forget the look on Aiden Mathis' face. He was beside himself. It was beautiful.
But getting back to the point, absolutely. The cost and the fame, and I feel like it's not just a Waverly issue, but with all places. I feel like it makes unfair expectations.
Agreed. Agreed. Do you believe that the cost itself is fair?
All right. I'm going to get into a little bit of weeds, and this is not pointed at Waverly Hills or any specific location. I can tell you for a fact, and definitely not pointed at Waverly Hills, because I can tell you for a fact that I've been there twice. The first time, Tina and Charlie didn't really have a whole lot of help, and they, I believe, had not too long ago obtained the building from when we first arrived there.
Mm-hmm.
What I can tell you is actually kind of a little bit to my chagrin, because there's a couple of open areas that I kind of missed from the first time, because they have been doing renovations.
Lots.
There are doors set up where they didn't used to be. There are areas closed off and renovated and cleaned up and set up for like a command station that didn't used to be there. Like, it used to literally be a completely separate outbuilding. And let me tell you how fucking nerve-wracking it is to be the tech guy and the only person in the building when you're changing tapes. Yes, tapes, because that's when we first went there. They didn't have digital bullshit.
Oh.
All right. It's terrifying to be in that building by yourself.
Yes,
Like, you wanna
it
talk
is.
about your mind running away from you, that shit's gonna happen. But what I can say with some other places is I would like with the popularity that the paranormal world has evolved into, I would like to see some of these places getting renovated much better than what they are.
I do agree with that.
And I think that if you are showing and proving renovations, I am way more willing to spend $1,000 with you
Mhm.
than repeatedly keep spending money on places where I'm like, you haven't done
You've done
anything.
nothing.
You've
Yeah.
done nothing. This place is still falling apart.
Yeah, I don't even
Uh,
see that somebody's taken a broom to the hallway.
in 5 years, it might not be here.
Right. Exactly.
So what I will say is with Waverly, yeah, I feel like the cost is fair. Like they've at least been working on the buildings. What I can say from personal experience, the second trip, which was what, last year or the year before?
Year before.
A big difference is it looks like they have been working on the roof and 502 is there, but it's not there anymore.
Right.
Like the elevator shaft is still there. Like there is still like the stairwell entrance there, but last time we were there, it was like wood framing with plastic tarps wrapped around it,
Yeah.
which again, it looks like they were working on it.
Renovation. Yeah, absolutely.
But the problem with that is when it comes to trying to like record anything or test any claims,
Tarps
like
in the wind
no,
on
no,
that.
a light breeze, and all I heard was that tarp flapping in
Oh,
the wind
yeah, it
all
was
night.
bad. It was bad. But I do want to completely agree on that one. I know for an absolute fact that windows, let's talk about windows for a moment. Windows are ridiculous expensive. Just to do our porch, we're looking at like $30,000.
Absolutely.
We're talking about an 800,000 square foot building that was made up of nothing but windows because they felt like fresh air and sunshine was a treatment for these people.
But you know what? This is what I'll say. They did it right.
Oh,
By
the
that, I mean, they took out all of the windows on a couple of the floors, as opposed to like, we can't afford to do anything right now. Like, don't put plastic over it.
yeah, don't
Take
do
the
that.
window out.
With
We'll
that
deal with it.
said, though, all of the windows aside from the outside balcony, 100% replaced every window in the whole friggin' 800,000 square foot building. I know for a fact that it got a brand new roof. I know
Yep.
that they're working on the actual structural integrity of the building.
Well, this is what I'll say though. Absolutely do. When you're looking at $1,000 to $1,200 a night for a place, like, and like I said, they've done a good job, and this is me giving them their kudos.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. I agree.
But when you're looking at $1,000 a night times 365 days a year, and that place is pretty booked solid from spring to fall,
Oh,
like
absolutely.
you don't get to be like, oh, well, we couldn't afford windows.
Right? But no, I agree. Tina and Charles Mattingly are the past and current owners of that building. It is run now more so by
The Historic
the
Society.
Historical Society, who has sort of taken over to help out because, I mean, obviously, it's a lot for one couple to handle. So now they have a whole dang team. But,
Which is how it should be.
agreed. But I mean, they're paying their security staff.
Yep.
And they do keep that building incredibly safe. You do not have to worry about people busting in there on you, stealing your shit, messing with your car, none of that.
Oh, absolutely. And to be honest with you, that was a big difference between the first time we went and the second time we went.
Yeah, it was like a
Like they
couple
didn't
of
have the fences and the security.
it was literally a couple of dudes with walkie-talkies out in the far yard.
In fact, there was a good chance that our buddy Dean was going to be the guy that re-roofed the place if he had the time to do it.
Yep, and unfortunately Katrina hit and
And New Orleans, here we come.
yes, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, definitely huge applause to that. So, yeah, the cost, I think, for Waverly is fair, and they are using the funds in an incredibly useful and appropriate manner to restore and care for that amazing piece of history.
I agree. And let me be clear when I say that these places that charge $200 to $400, depending, like I understand that's different than, I mean, also again, you're looking at something the size of a schoolhouse as opposed to something the size of a fucking hospital.
Right.
So the cost difference is dramatically different. But also, to be clear, with historic buildings, you have to use specific materials in order to do that. And I realized that with some of these places only charging $200 to $400 and some of these places that aren't getting quite the attention that Waverly gets, there's a big difference there, right? We've gone to certain locations 5 and 6 times now.
Mhm.
And it's basically, whenever we message and be like, hey, we want to come, within a week or two, we get there.
Yeah.
It's not like Trans Allegheny where they're like, hey, no, we're booked all fucking
Yeah,
year now.
sorry,
Like,
you can
forget it.
come see us next week, next
So, like,
year.
don't get me wrong, I'm getting leeway there. And also, that's one of the things that I want to promote, like, this season is getting some of these places that aren't booked solid all the time a little bit of attention so that A, people get to go check it out because that's fucking awesome.
Agreed.
And B, they get a little help with their own renovations.
That's so true. So, to kind of sum it all up, is it worth investigating?
This is how I want to sum it up completely. I would say that if it is realistically within your budget, it is absolutely worth investigating.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, don't pass up. All right. This is not a knock against Waverly in any sense of the word, but don't pass up on the local place that you're going to get to go 2 or 3 times because you're like, oh my God, I want to save up and not do anything else all year just for Waverly. And it's not anything against Waverly. And if you want to do that, that's no knock against you. Do that. That's fine. Just realize what we already said. That building does not care how much money you spent. That building does not care how far you drove. That building doesn't owe you shit. And if it is within your reasonable budget to go, I absolutely say go. Go, have a good time, experience that. It's a fucking great place. If it's not and it's stretching you thin, don't go.
Yeah.
Go to your $500 place 2 times.
Exactly.
Because I wouldn't want you to go and make a 6-hour trip like we did and then have a place not live up to its expectations for you.
And I think that for me is where it's super, super important to stress that the building doesn't owe you anything. And you need to go for the love of history. You need to go for the love of investigating. You need to go for the love of what the place was built to be. Not just because you saw a whole bunch of crazy claims and, you want that YouTube experience.
Don't go chasing Sam and Colby or Ghost Adventures or Project Fear or Taps.
They're all fabulous.
They're all great. They are in their own way. We can talk all we want about who we will not. That's fine. All of those groups have earned their place. They really have.
Fact.
All right. Whether we like them or not, they've earned their place. But don't go chasing that because real paranormal investigation is not that.
And sometimes you sit for 8 hours in a 100% dark, 100% silent building.
I will also say, just to kind of want, you know what? No, I'll save that for the next podcast because it kind of fits in better. So.
Super important though, if you do intend to go investigate Waverly Hills yourself, we would genuinely love to hear what happens. I want to know what you experienced. I want to know what stood out to you.
Or if you've already done it.
Oh, yeah. Tell me all about it. What questions are you still trying to answer? You can find us on Facebook at No Lights Paranormal. Visit us at nolightsparanormal.com, which is still under construction, but I promise I'm getting to it. Or reach out through any of our other social media pages, because every investigation starts with somebody asking a question. Sometimes those questions lead to answers, and sometimes they just lead to better questions. And honestly, we're okay with that.
So, thank you for spending some time with us tonight. Keep your recorders running. Keep your notes honest. And until next time, don't fuck with the Baba Yaga.